I didn't really uncover the story. We used to have a religion writer at the paper. We used to have a much bigger staff, and we don't have a reporter devoted to covering the churches and religion in Lincoln. And sometime last summer, over a weekend, the Catholic Diocese put out a press release saying that they had disciplined a priest at St. Peter's Church for inappropriate behavior. And I think our weekend intern handled that, wrote a short story. But that kind of triggered something in August. I think later that week, a former priest from Lincoln wrote a long piece for a national online magazine. He had been a seminarian who became a priest in Lincoln in the 90s, and he was involved at the Newman Center. And he wrote a long piece describing the pretty highly sexualized behavior of a very well-respected Monsignor, Monsignor Leonard Kaland, who died about 10 years ago. But this was kind of a revelation, and then more seminarians from the Newman Center from the 90s stepped forward and corroborated his account. And so the Catholic Church released a statement saying they were looking into it. It was kind of like, you know, almost a waterfall of events, because there was the allegation against Monsignor Kaland from the 90s at the Newman Center on campus, and then additionally, a man from Lincoln stepped forward and accused his priest of assaulting him in the 80s, a different priest, in Seward. And so the Catholic priest in Lincoln was dealing with all this, and it just seemed like almost every week the Catholic Church in Lincoln was releasing another statement about another priest who had been removed from a church for inappropriate behavior. I think ultimately there were like 8 or 9 priests that they had to remove. Simultaneously, the Bishop James Connolly started, I think, making an effort to be more transparent about how the church was dealing with this. They made an anonymous hotline if people felt that they had been abused in the past. They hired a victim witness advocate to help past victims of sex assault. He appointed a task force to investigate what's been happening in the diocese. And at the same time, the Attorney General got involved last year, and he announced that he had asked the 3 dioceses in Nebraska for records, for their internal records of allegations of abuse dating back 40 years. And so late last year, the Omaha Diocese made a special website. They had turned over this stuff to the Attorney General, and they identified nearly 40 clergy members and diocese employees that they believed had credible allegations against them. Not all of them had been charged criminally, but based on the Omaha Diocese's own investigation, they felt like the allegations were true against these 40 or so former clergy members and priests. And Lincoln just did its own report last week where they identified 9 former priests that they think have substantiated allegations against them. I think what's happening nationally and even internationally, more and more of the Catholic Church is self-identifying and self-reporting these suspected abusers. And I think about 2/3 of the dioceses in the country right now have released the identities of priests that they believe that sometime in the past had abused children. I don't know if the former priest from Lincoln hadn't written a thing about Kaland, if the victim of the 80s sex assault by a priest in Seward hadn't come forward, if the Attorney General hadn't stepped into this issue, I don't know what the diocese would have done. I mean, they might not have done anything.
Okay.
But it's become it wasn't my beat to begin with, but it's certainly keeping me pretty busy. That's a good question. After I write these stories, I sometimes hear from parishioners and from members of the diocese. And there are a lot of people in this community who are devout Catholics. They love the church, and they're really pissed off at the diocese for not doing more. And so there is a split between the central administration, the bishop and his officers, and then the lay people of the church, the people who go to church. And I think there's more, not really a backlash, but the people who care about the church and don't want this to blemish the church, they're becoming more vocal, and I hear more from them.
Okay.
I'm more concerned with the facts than the stereotypes. You know, and certainly if you look at this, when my stories appear on our website, or when the Journal-Star posts the story to its Facebook page, if you look at the comments, you'll certainly see the stereotypes playing out. You know, people have this belief that all priests are pedophiles. You know, and there's certainly a lot more priests in the Lincoln Diocese that, as far as we know, have not been accused of anything than those who have been accused of something. But I mean, there's that stereotype out there, and the minute my story goes online, you start seeing people taking those hits.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know, I'm not sure. I try to be very fair and accurate in my coverage. And I really can't control the takeaway that people have when they read that story, but you know, I don't try to paint with a broad brush. If I'm writing about a single priest who's being accused of something, I'm sticking to that story. But what happens, you know, after there have been 7 or 8 Lincoln Diocese priests who have been removed from their church for various reasons, you know, they're having a relationship with an adult parishioner, or they're giving alcohol to a 19-year-old altar boy. So you get to the 6th priest, or the 7th priest you're writing about, you know, you have to have context and background. So I have to say, you know, this is the 7th priest to have been removed in the, you know, since August. And that certainly probably plays in to the stereotypes, because it looks like there's a hell of a trend there. You know, I think the value of when I listed each priest, when they were ordained, and all the different places they've served, you know, if there's one victim, there might be 2 victims. And so if people read the story and they see, oh, this guy served at my church and I remember something happening, I mean, they might, past victims, now that they know these priests have been identified, might be more inclined to come forward and get whatever help they need, or anything from the diocese they can get. I mean, just speaking for the Journal-Star, I have a hard time thinking that we would perpetuate stereotypes. You know, if there was something similar happening in the Methodist Church or the Lutheran Church, we'd certainly be covering it. It just seems to be right now focused on the Catholics.